Thank you. Super excited to be here in London and helping sponsor the meetup and getting everyone together. I would totally agree. The acceleration that's happening is just astounding around Bitcoin and digital currency. So, we're actually very much focused on being a global company. We obviously have operations in the United States. We're also a European company with the headquarters in Dublin and planning to have our products be available throughout Europe. And so very focused on how Bitcoin and digital currency specifically are bringing together entrepreneurs and technologists and certainly, hopefully, mass adoption by consumers and businesses around the world over time. I want to talk about a few themes tonight and during this time that I think are important for all of us to be thinking about and being conversant in communicating about Bitcoin and in this sort of Bitcoin movement. I'm not going to talk in any detail about Circle's sort of forthcoming products, other than to say that we're working on products that we hope will make Bitcoin mass adoptable by consumers and businesses and make it easier to use all around the world. And I'm also not going to talk at length about the opportunity of Bitcoin. I think everyone understands inherently what that opportunity is and the tremendous power of this kind of global ledger system and payments platform and underlying infrastructure that can be used to build all kinds of interesting applications over time. What I want to talk about actually is the risks. And I know that sounds strange coming from an entrepreneur who is trying to build products that drive towards mainstream acceptance. But I think it's really important for people who are really involved in this ecosystem to be able to be thoughtful about the risks that are being raised. We've seen over the past couple of months warnings issued from governments all around the world about the risks of digital currency or virtual currency and Bitcoin specifically. And it's important that we not just dismiss those outright and sort of believe one's own hype. And I think it's also important not to sort of treat those as sort of fear-mongering or conspiratorial theories that central banks are threatened by digital currency. I really don't think that's the case. I think there are legitimate issues and risks, and those have to be addressed for this to be adopted really, really broadly. And so I want to talk about what those are, how they're being articulated, and I think some responses that all of us can be thoughtful about as well as we try and engage and educate and build businesses around this. So the first that a lot of people talk about, of course, is volatility. This is highly volatile. And what I like to do when pressed with that issue, which is pretty much every conversation that I have with anyone in business or finance or journalists or others, is acknowledge it. First and foremost, it is highly volatile. This is not a stable pricing environment, and it's not a stable pricing environment that general consumers and businesses would really rely upon. Well, there's reasons for that. We have a very immature infrastructure today. We have an infrastructure that can process 7 transactions per second. We have trading exchanges that are in nascent markets, but we don't have significant scaled out trading exchanges that operate throughout the world in financial capitals and other markets. We don't have meaningful ways for institutional participation to take place to participate in this market. We don't have pricing mechanisms such as derivatives and hedging and short positions that are really critical to smoothing pricing. And so it shouldn't be surprising that we have an environment such as that. I also like to point out to people, and this is something I'm familiar with just from my own personal experience in taking companies public, is that even the trading volume that we see on a daily basis is really small. 30,000 Bitcoins, 50,000 Bitcoins. This is like a small cap stock. And when you have low volume and you have low liquidity, you have high volatility. And so these are, real issues. The answer isn't, oh God, this is volatile, therefore we should just throw this out, the baby with the bathwater. It's really to focus on, well, how do you establish a stronger pricing environment? And that's to build, viable exchange products that operate in mature markets that are institutionally based and have institutional participation and have more sophisticated mechanisms of pricing. And I think as we see that happen, and I know certainly in this room probably, and I know from entrepreneurs in other markets, including the US, that there are significant projects that are meaningfully venture-backed that are focused on building more mature exchange environments. And I think that will help lead to a more stable pricing environment. And that's really critical because I think, at least from our perspective, We're focused on how does this get used as a global payments platform, how does this get used in everyday business, and that's going to be important. There are ways to hedge risk, and for companies like Circle or others to alleviate that for businesses that accept these payments. But at the end of the day, we need a stable pricing environment. Even if it's a constantly appreciating pricing environment, I think it's one that does require that kind of level of maturity. And people respond well to that line of reasoning. The other big risk that's talked about is sort of fraud and theft. And I think this is also a very real issue. We now have a asset class that's 10 or 11 billion US dollars. And as that price has grown, criminals have focused on attacking holders of that asset, whether that's individuals with digital wallets on their computers, or it's exchange operators or other operators that have not focused on putting the right level of security around those digital assets. And so this is a very real issue. We're not going to see grandma and grandpa or mom and dad or others more broadly adopting a technology where they feel exposed to having their funds stolen very easily. And so this is real, and I think we do need higher standards for consumer protection. The mechanisms that we have today, whether it's in a desktop environment or an online/cloud-based environment, there's additional layers of protocols and security and other that need to be wrapped around that. And I think it's legitimate for governments that are looking after consumer funds and the theft of funds to be able to have a means to set standards around that. So I think that's also a very real issue that is sort of facing us today. And again, it's not something we should just outright dismiss, but we have to take it really, really seriously. And it's great to see things like Elliptic Vault emerge here, which are obviously trying to address that in some really, I think, exciting ways. Criminal abuse is another risk that's identified, and this is also real. This is a very powerful, very flexible, very instant platform for money transfer, and it's wonderful for criminals if they find ways to abuse it. And so, I don't think it's very easy to try and sort of say, well, that's a mea culpa or that's a convenient excuse, because as we all know, criminals use the existing financial system and hoard and use cash and transfer that all around. That's sort of transferring the issue. But it is a real issue, and I think at a minimum, commercial exchanges that are interacting with the existing financial infrastructure need to have rigorous forms of knowing their customers, monitoring for fraudulent behavior, monitoring for suspicious transactions, and trying as best as possible to keep bad actors off of these platforms. I don't think the burden should be any greater than it is for other existing financial institutions. But I think it is really critical, again, because if we don't have that kind of set of controls in place, I don't think this is going to be legitimate in the eyes of government. And there may be some of you that say, that's great, this isn't about being legitimate in the eyes of government. But again, if we really want this to be adopted broadly in the same way that other fundamental internet technologies are adopted really broadly on a day-to-day basis, this has to be addressed as well. Which sort of leads to a sort of second and related theme, which is a controversial one, but I think a really critical one, and one that we certainly deal with on a day-to-day basis, which is sort of what is the role of government oversight for Bitcoin-based businesses. And a lot of the risks that we're talking about here, and the risks that have, I think, legitimately been identified, can undermine the potential of this technology, and undermine the potential of connecting the planet with a common, open system of payments and formats for money and much, much more. But I think there have to be ways that private enterprise and open developer communities and community-based participation in technology development can interact with civil society to make this trustworthy for broad-based, broad-based usage. And so, I think a lot of people think that government oversight would kill Bitcoin and its purpose. And I think, again, that's being very short-sighted. A key role of government, in particular, in the oversight of financial products and services is ensuring that the private market can protect consumers from fraud and theft, can provide a stable environment for commerce, and can limit the system's abuse by bad actors. And that's exactly what one set out to do. And again, you can argue about whether existing frameworks to do that with the existing banking system are effective or not, but that is effectively what that role is. And I think these are reasonable goals. I think the challenge for all of us here is to focus on how do we within the private sector, how do we within a open source community innovate to solve some of these problems so that we don't need a lot of rulemaking from governments around the world, but that we can solve these problems in significant and ultimately resilient ways. In the US, I'm actually encouraged by what I'm seeing. We spend a lot of time with a lot of different stakeholders at a state level, at a federal level, whether it be the Federal Reserve or the US Treasury Department or the Consumer Protection Bureau, to many, many others. And there's a genuine acceptance of the fact that this is a really disruptive and potentially highly innovative platform that can change the way finance works in the world and can change the way institutions, consumers, and businesses interact. And there is acceptance of that possibility, but there's also a great deal of skepticism and a great deal of learning that's out there. And so I think it's important to at least have a posture of understanding the role of that kind of rulemaking within civil society and understand the relationship of that to private and free market innovation, and in particular, this sort of open source model of technology development that sits as an underpinning here. This sort of really leads to the last theme, which is very evident from having this group of people here tonight, which is that we're all part of a very rapidly evolving, very significant global movement around digital currency. And I haven't seen a technology and an opportunity like this inspire so many people so quickly than I have here really since the very early days and birth of the commercial internet back in the early 1990s. And so that's incredible, obviously, and I think we're all believers in the ideals and the movement that sit behind Bitcoin of a global currency that can connect every person on the planet in a common and decentralized architecture to make financial services broader and more efficient for users, and also increase financial privacy for individuals around the world as well. So we're, I think, part of a movement that is pioneering things that are going to take 10 or 20 years to evolve. The pace has obviously accelerated in this particular space over the past 6 months, and I think it's a similar kind of acceleration that we saw when the first web browsers and HTTP and HTML and other technologies emerged. But it's going to take a really long time for this to get built. I think it's really critical that groups like this in every city all around the planet are trying to work well together. And as entrepreneurs that fill these rooms and technologists that fill these rooms interact with their own local civil society, with their own institutional structures, that we find ways to share what we're learning on a worldwide basis, because these issues are going to be replicated in every country, in every state, and so on all around the world. And so as a movement, that kind of transparency and collaboration is really critical as well. I think it's obviously very, very exciting. We're clearly on the cusp of something that I think none of us even can fully comprehend where it's going to go. And we're excited to just be a part of it and supporting it in a lot of different ways. Thank you.